Thanks for joining us today. This presentation is the Federal Application Overview. Our purpose is to provide information to assist in the completion of a federal application. Please note that the scope of this presentation will be specific to the federal award application process. Our goal today is to provide guidance that will help you be successful in completing the application process. You may hear us reference companion documents and funding instructions. Those documents, along with this presentation, are intended to be helpful resources for you. It will be beneficial to reference all supporting documents and resources UOVC has provided as you complete your application. Let's get started. First off, I'll provide an overview of the applicant information section of the application. After clicking into this section, the first few data fields are related to your organization's information. This information auto-populates from the agency profile. Please take some time to review the information here for accuracy to ensure any changes to your organization have been updated. As we start a new award cycle, it is essential to verify all applicant information is current. If any information needs to be changed, you may make those changes in GMS in the account information. The next slides are the Unique Entity Identifier, UEI field, and the Employer Identification Number, EIN. Both of those fields have small information bullets in the upper left side of the box. Those info bullets will provide additional information that will assist in completing that specific field. To find your UEI, you can look at the very top of your System for Award Management, SAM, verification document, or on sam.gov. For your EIN number, you may reference your organization's W-9. These items are requested for a few reasons. One, the UEI and the EIN are conditions of receiving federal funding. Two, this information auto-populates into the award letters, which is required by federal rule. And three, the Grant Management System, GMS, houses these important numbers for UOVC audit purposes. The next two fields pertain to the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act, FFADA, requirement. This was updated in the federal rule in 2024 and requires that State Administering Agency, SAA, gather this information from subrecipients to report on the FFADA website. Two notes: the FFADA operates on the state fiscal year, and if you answer no to question 1, the second question should be left blank. Completing the primary point of contact, POC, and the financial point of contact, FPOC, sections provides UOVC with the names and contact information of the individuals that will be responsible for managing communication, overseeing compliance, and addressing any questions or requirements related to the grant. Assigning 2 different individuals to these roles increases internal controls, reduces risk, and ensure coverage if the main POC cannot be reached. UOVC does not require that the POC and FPOC be different people, but we do consider it best practice. Moving on to the project section. The project short title field is up first. Enter the title in the following format: agency name, program type, grant type, 2-year cycle, 2025 to 2027. By following this format, you help us easily identify the program and provide continuity among the awards. An example is Porch Light Services, CJC, VOCA, 2025 to 2027. Second is the project short description. Provide a brief 2 to 3 sentence, clear, concise description of your program, including the type of program, law enforcement, nonprofit, etc., type of services provided, legal assistance, advocacy, etc., and the crime categories served, domestic violence, sexual assault, etc. I'd like to highlight the indirect cost percent section because it's a new update. Applicants may include an indirect cost rate of up to 15% under the de minimis rate standard. This rate must remain consistent across all federal grants awarded by UOVC. If an agency has negotiated rate, they have to use that negotiated rate, even if it's less than the 15 de minimis. Per federal guidelines, indirect costs can only be applied to contracted fees up to $50,000. If your request includes a budget with contracted fees that exceeds this amount, please contact Program Manager Mariah Peace at mpease@utah.gov for guidance on how to structure your budget. The project period start and end dates should be entered as a start date of July 1st, 2025, and an end date of June 30th, 2027. The dates you enter here will auto-populate to the award letter, so please ensure you're using the correct dates. In the counties served section, you may select all the counties that your program serves. And the final question within this section is the implementing agency type. Select the agency type from the 4 options in the drop-down menu that best describe your organization. Now that we've covered the applicant info section of the application, we'll be transitioning into the application information section, where we'll focus on the narrative part of your grant application. I'll walk you through some of the important updates and offer tips to help you navigate these changes. This entire section has been revised with new questions and updated wording. So if you worked with us before, you're likely going to notice the differences right away. First, let's talk about the changes. Every single question in this section is either brand new or has been updated. That's important to note because this isn't just a minor tweak, it's a complete overhaul. Next, each question has a word count limit of 750 words or 2,500 characters. That means you have enough space to be detailed, but also concise. And finally, each question includes an information box. These boxes are there to provide additional guidance, so I strongly encourage you to read them carefully. They're designed to help you focus your responses and make sure you're covering everything we're asking for. So, why did we make these changes? What's the goal? We want your responses to be specific to your organization and your program. This isn't the place for general statistics or information about statewide issues. We already have that background knowledge. What we are looking for is your unique perspective, how your program addresses these changes and meets the needs of your community. It's also important to note that this section is heavily weighted in the review process. In fact, it makes up to 40% of your total external review score. We've even included a resource on the UOV website showing exactly how this section is scored. Clear, complete, and specific responses will make it much easier for reviewers to understand the purpose and impact of your program, as well as the collaboration behind it. Now let's talk about how to tackle this section effectively. First, make sure you review the grant-specific instructions packet thoroughly. We've broken down each question in detail, and following these guidelines will save you time and effort. Let me highlight a couple of focus tips. Question 4. This is where you'll provide an overview of how your budget supports your program plan. You don't need to break it down into line items here. Just explain how your budget aligns with your goals. Question 6. There's no text box for this one. Instead, you'll upload your data or evidence as a file. Returning agencies and new agencies have slightly different instructions for this, so pay close attention to the guidance provided. Also, when you're titling your document, make sure it's clear and follows the format outlined in the Files section. This is a required document, so don't skip it. Lastly, remember that the program plans or the goals and objectives section of the application will differ depending on the funding source you're applying for. Make sure you watch the grant-specific recording for more details on this part. To wrap up, I encourage you to review the instructions and resources we've provided, and don't hesitate to reach out using the public Q&A form if you have questions. This section of the application is critical, and we're here to support you in submitting a strong proposal. Remember, detail and clarity are key. Take the time to provide complete, thoughtful answers that address every part of the question.
Welcome to the Budget and Funding Considerations section of our federal grants training. In this session, we'll cover general budget guidance that applies to all federal grant sources, VOCA, VAWA, and SASP, and highlight some important updates. We'll walk through each budget category in detail to help you navigate and allocate funds appropriately. Keep in mind that each grant source has specific details, like match requirements and funding availability. So be sure to review the instruction packets and grant-specific videos for that extra guidance. Let's begin with the budget basics, starting with the funding cycle dates. For this grant, the cycle runs from July 1st, 2025 to June 30th, 2027. It's important to remember that this is a 2-year grant, so you will need to submit separate budgets for year 1 and year 2. Each year's budget should reflect the allocation of funds for that particular year. As you're filling out the budget, make sure to use the correct budget categories for expenses. This includes categories like personnel, supplies, equipment, and more. Using the right categories ensures that expenses are tracked accurately. Now let's talk about the expenditure timeline. It's important to remember that expenses will not roll over from year 1 to year 2. You should plan your budget so that expenses can be fully expended within the program year. If you have items or services that will extend into year 2, make sure to budget them accordingly. Regarding match requirements, each grant source has different match requirements, and we will address these in more detail during the specific grant training sessions. We will not go over them here since they vary depending on the grant source you're applying for. Lastly, be aware of any unallowable costs as outlined in the grant-specific instructions. Each program has its own set of rules for what can and cannot be funded, so be sure to review those guidelines. Now that we've covered the budget basics, let's look at some important updates and new changes that you need to be aware of as you begin working with your budget. There are 2 main updates I would like to highlight. First, we have shifted from providing specific funding category priorities and budget restrictions to what we now call funding considerations. This change allows you more flexibility in building your budget, as you are the expert on what your program needs. While we encourage you to align your budget with your program plan, please keep in mind that it's not realistic to expect that all funding requests will be granted. You can refer to your grant application instruction packets for detailed funding considerations for each category. Second, we've streamlined the budget justification process. In the past, you were required to fill out a budget justification worksheet, which was an Excel sheet, which could be time-consuming. This year, we've replaced that with a much simpler process. A justification text box directly in the GMS under each budget line item. It's important that you provide a clear, detailed justification for each expense. explaining why it's necessary and how it aligns with your program's plan. Note that each justification text box has a 750 character limit, so be concise while still being thorough. This change applies to both year 1 and year 2 budgets, ensuring that all expenses are justified directly in the system. These updates should help reduce the paperwork and provide more flexibility while still ensuring that your budget is well thought out and aligned with your program plan. Well, with these updates in mind, let's take a look at how you can navigate and enter this information into the GMS. As we look at this image on the budget screen, let me walk you through some key features. First, navigate to the Budget tab in the GMS. Once you're there, use the drop-down option to select the budget year you're working on, either year 1 or year 2. Remember, you'll need to create separate budgets for each year, so be sure to complete both. Next, as you enter your budget, the budget groups will automatically update. The Summary section, located in the middle of the screen, will display the total amounts for federal funding, match, and indirect costs. Be sure to monitor this summary to ensure your budget is populating as expected. Specifically, the field labeled Total Federal Direct shows the total amount of federal funds you are requesting. Keep an eye on this figure to make sure it aligns with your grants funding request. To start building your budget, look for the plus button icon. This is where you'll click to create individual line items under the appropriate budget categories. And lastly, the eyeball icon is a helpful tool that provides a view-only summary of your request for each budget category. These tools within the GMS are designed to streamline your budget creation process and ensure everything is organized and accounted for. When working on the personnel section, there are a few key areas to focus on. First, let's go over how to enter personnel information. For each position, ensure that you list the job title, such as case manager or program coordinator, in both the planned employees attending field and the title field. This duplication is important because it ensures the information pulls through correctly to other categories, such as the fringe benefits, making the process more thorough and easier for you later on. Next, enter the total yearly salary, which represents the full annual salary for the position, essentially the amount your agency will pay the employee over the entire year. After that, input the grant yearly salary, which is the portion of the total salary you are requesting to be covered by the grant for the grant year. Next, let's cover the justification. Each position you include needs a strong explanation in the justification box. Think about how that position ties directly to your program goals and why it's essential for providing services. Be clear, detailed, and connect it back to your program needs. For funding considerations, we want to make sure programs have enough staff to handle caseloads effectively and provide trauma-informed care. Positions funded through this grant should have sufficient time allocated to make a meaningful impact, ideally 0.25 FTE or higher. However, exceptions can be made for shared administrative roles, but the goal is to create sustainable, impactful staffing. Finally, let's go over the new updates for this cycle. You no longer need to associate a specific individual with each position at the time of application. Just focus on detailing the role and funding needs. This is part of a streamlined approach to make the process smoother. So as you work through the personnel section, keep these 4 areas in mind: how to enter the information, providing strong justification, aligning with funding priorities, and being aware of the updates for this cycle. Let's take a look at fringe benefits and how to properly enter this information in your budget. First, fringe benefits must be based on actual known costs. You should be able to justify the benefit request amount with documentation if that is requested. It's important to note that only personnel listed in the personnel section are eligible for benefits, and those benefits must correspond to the grant percentage of time that person will devote to the project. So for example, if an employee's salary is 75% grant funded, you can request 75% or less of fringe benefit costs. To start entering fringe benefits, use the award detail dropdown to select the correct position. Make sure you've chosen the appropriate funding source beforehand, as this ensures the benefits are tied to the right person. Next, input the yearly agency benefit cost. This is the total annual cost your agency will pay for that position's benefits. Then, in the yearly grant benefit cost field, include the portion of the total you're requesting the grant to cover. After that, select the specific benefits provided by your agency, things like health insurance, payroll taxes, or retirement contributions. If you do select other, don't forget to add a detailed explanation in the justification box, describing the benefit and why it's necessary for the role. Lastly, let's discuss the funding considerations under the fringe benefit category. Fringe benefits are important because they help support your staff with things like health insurance and retirement contributions. This is especially key for staff working directly with victims, as it supports their well-being while they provide trauma-informed care. Just make sure the benefits are proportional to the funded positions and match the amount of time each role will spend on the project. So remember, only eligible personnel, accurate costs or formulas, and thoughtful alignment with grant-funded roles. This ensures you're building a sustainable and supportive budget for your program. This section is designed to support activities that contribute to staff development and improve victim services. However, to ensure that your travel expenses are properly accounted for, we need to be very clear and reasonable in our justifications. When entering travel costs, it's important to itemize each cost by its specific purpose. For example, if you're budgeting for car mileage, provide the total miles anticipated and the reimbursement rate per mile. Similarly, if you're including gas, airfare, or rental cars, list these individually with clear estimates for each cost. Don't just list general expenses. Avoid using TBD. Instead, ensure all costs are detailed and reflect the actual expenses for the activity. Also remember to separate client-related mileage and training-related mileage into two different line items. This helps ensure clarity and that you're tracking your travel expenses accurately. When entering travel costs, make sure to explain the purpose for each expense in the budget justification box. For example, is the travel for staff development, client outreach, or a training session? All costs must be necessary for the program's operation and reasonable in nature. So provide enough detail to explain why these costs are crucial. Let's dive into the funding considerations. While there are special considerations for different grant sources, generally, travel funding will prioritize activities that directly enhance victim services, like mobile client response, engagement with community partners, and staff training. Travel for grant-funded staff and in-state training are usually the most cost-effective and impactful ways to use your travel funds. If you are requesting out-of-state travel or requesting travel for non-grant funded staff, it's important to provide a compelling justification. Your justification should clearly demonstrate why the travel is necessary and how it aligns with your program plan. However, keep in mind that these type of requests are not guaranteed to be approved. Be specific in explaining the importance of the travel and the anticipated outcomes in the budget justification box. In summary, itemize all travel costs by purpose, clearly justify the necessity of each expense, focus on in-state travel and grant-funded staff, and provide detailed and compelling justification for any out-of-state travel or travel for non-grant funded staff. Also be sure to read the instructions and watch training modules specific to each grant source, as funding considerations may vary between grants. All travel costs must align with your internal travel policy. When we talk about the equipment category, we're focusing on items that cost $10,000 or more per unit and are necessary for your program's operation. If you're requesting equipment, make sure to give a detailed description of each item. This includes the quantity you plan to purchase, the unit price, and an explanation of how it supports your program's goals. It's important to remember that items with a unit cost under $10,000 should be itemized as supplies, not equipment. When considering funding for equipment, we prioritize items that address emergent needs, especially those that are essential for delivering core victim services. Requests for equipment that directly support the program plan and address immediate needs will be prioritized. On the other hand, non-essential or non-urgent equipment requests are a lower priority. Now that we've covered equipment, let's shift to another essential category, supplies, which include all expendable items necessary for your program. When completing the supplies category, remember the goal is to detail all the necessary items that directly support your program. Start by listing each supply or group of supplies you're requesting, along with the quantity and the unit price. This helps us understand your needs and ensures we can assess the budget accurately. Here's a key tip. When you're including supplies in your budget, focus on items that are expendable or consumable during the project period. Think of things like paper, pens, or cleaning products. Those are great examples. Now, there are some exceptions, like furniture or electronics. Since those are durable goods, they aren't considered expendable and will need to be tracked through inventory. When it comes to justification, it's important to be detailed. If you're grouping items together, say office supplies, take an extra moment to break those down in the justification box. Include specifics like pens, notebooks, or printer paper. Doing this helps us verify that every item you're requesting is truly necessary for the project. On the funding side, remember that we're looking for items that directly support your core services. Supplies that help deliver victim services more effectively. Think about how each item aligns with your program plan. For example, if you're requesting art supplies for a therapy group, explain that those materials will help clients in their recovery journey. Justifications like these are essential to demonstrate how your supply needs contribute to the program's success. By following these steps and being as clear as possible in your request, you'll strengthen your application and ensure it aligns with funding considerations. Let's talk about the contracted fees category in your grant request. This category is designed to cover payments for external expertise or resources necessary for your project. These fees can be used for specific services that your team cannot provide internally, but they must comply with federal guidelines. It's important to ensure that all requests are well documented to demonstrate the necessity and alignment with your project goals. For individual contractors, you'll need to include some specific details. Start by outlining the type of service being performed, for example, counseling or training delivery. You'll also need to provide the contractor's name so we know who is providing the service. Be sure to include their hourly or daily rate, keeping in mind the federally allowed rate caps at $81.25 per hour or $600 per day, unless written approval is provided in advance for a higher rate. Finally, specify the total time they'll be working, whether that's in hours or days. When it comes to contracts with firms, the requirements are slightly different. You should specify the type of services the firm will provide, such as IT support or audit services, and provide the total cost of the contract. If there are any pro-rated audit costs included, be sure to document those as well. Let's talk about a couple of key federal guidelines that do apply. Contracted fees cannot cover training, travel, equipment, or supplies for the contractor. Additionally, indirect costs can only be applied to contracted fees up to $50,000. If you are including indirect costs and anticipate that your contracted fees will exceed $50,000, please contact UOVC grant staff for guidance on how to appropriately enter that information into your budget. Ultimately, it's critical to ensure that all contracted fees directly support the core services of your project and align with the program plan. Make sure to follow your internal contractor or procurement policy and have a detailed contract in place prior to any work being performed by a contractor or consultant. Let's go over the training category and how to include it properly in your grant application. This category is designed to cover expenses that support the professional development of your team and improve the delivery of victim services. However, it's important to itemize and justify all expenses to show they are necessary and reasonable. When budgeting for training, include detailed information such as costs for meals, lodging, and registration fees. Specify the number of training days, the number of hotel rooms needed, and the number of attendees. Be sure to identify the positions of the attendees to show how their participation supports your program plan. For example, if you are sending 2 advocates to a 3-day conference, your budget should account for lodging for 2 people for 3 nights, meals for 3 days, and registration fees for both attendees. If your organization does not have a specific travel policy, use GSA rates to estimate travel costs. If you're attending a pre-approved in-state training listed by UOVC, make sure to note that in your application. The pre-approved list is on our website. If the training you plan to attend is not on the pre-approved list, you'll need to provide additional details, like the training's website or a brochure, and explain how it will enhance victim services and benefit your program. One important note, please do not list TBD, to be determined, in your training or travel budget. You must either include a pre-approved in-state training or specify the exact training you plan to attend. If your plans change later, that is okay. You can update this during the award year with prior approval from UOVC. When considering funding, in-state training opportunities and training for grant-funded staff are typically viewed as the most cost-effective and impactful. If you're requesting funding for out-of-state training or training for non-grant funded staff, you'll need to provide a strong justification. This should include why the training is critical, how it aligns with your program plan, and the outcome you expect from attending. Keep in mind these requests are not guaranteed approval, so make sure your justification is detailed and convincing. Ultimately, training expenses should clearly demonstrate their value in improving victim services and helping you achieve your program objectives. Let's focus on the other category and how it should be handled in your budget requests. The purpose of this category is to cover costs that don't naturally fall into a predefined budget category. These are typically unique or critical expenses, such as emergency or direct client aid, or even housing or rental assistance. Essentially, this category provides a way to address specific needs that directly support victims, but don't fit elsewhere in the budget. When you're itemizing or grouping your expenses for the other category, make sure to group similar items together. For instance, if you're requesting funds for emergency groceries, utility assistance, or similar immediate needs, you can group these as emergency client aid It's essential to provide a detailed description for each group or item in the justification box. This description should explain the purpose of the expense and why it's necessary for achieving your program plan. The more specific and clear you are, the stronger your request will be. When considering requests for funding in this category, be sure to focus on making your request reasonable and well justified. It is also important to ensure that the items requested are designed to be effectively utilized within the grant cycle. This means that the expenses should be realistic and necessary for the current year, and you should avoid overestimating costs or including items that aren't directly tied to achieving your program's goals. Again, make sure everything is clear, justified, and focused on supporting victims. If you're unsure whether an expense belongs in the other category, please submit a question on the public Q&A, and the UOVC grant staff will provide a response. UOVC grant funds can support indirect costs, which are defined as expenses that benefit multiple projects, but cannot be directly assigned to a specific one, such as utilities, rent, insurance, office supplies, and internet, administrative staff, and audit costs. If your agency has a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, you must use that rate. Make sure to upload a copy of the letter from the federal government that shows your rate and expiration date. If you choose to take the de minimis rate, you can request up to 15%, but you must apply that same percentage across all federal grants your agency holds. Keep in mind that indirect costs are calculated based on a modified total direct cost base, which excludes certain expenses like equipment, capital expenditures, participant support costs, and any portions of subawards over $50,000. Also, if your request indirect costs, you cannot request the same items as direct costs or match unless they are prorated. To indicate your chosen rate, simply select your federally negotiated or de minimis rate in the applicant info section of the application. As a wrap up to this section, I want to remind everyone of a few key points. First, the information we covered regarding the budget section applies across all federal funding sources. However, it's crucial to keep in mind that each grant may have specific requirements or nuances. For those, we strongly encourage you to thoroughly review the grant-specific instruction packets and watch the grant-specific trainings provided. These resources will ensure you meet all expectations for your particular application. Second, we want to emphasize the importance of using the public Q&A forum for any questions you may have. By asking questions there, we can share answers with all applicants and provide clarity to everyone. It's a great way to address concerns transparently and consistently. Finally, don't forget that the UOVC website is a valuable resource. You'll find important documents, templates, and other tools to support your application process. Please take advantage of these materials to make the process as smooth as possible. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. We hope it was helpful and gave you the information you need. We're excited to see your applications and learn about all the great work you're doing. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.